You have one unheard message. Left at 3:47 a.m. That's my voice. On my own answering machine. Leaving myself a message I have absolutely no memory of making. I want you to sit with that for a second, because I know how it sounds. I know exactly how it sounds, because I've replayed that moment in my mind every single day for the past 3 years. The way the automated voice read out the timestamp. The way the refrigerator hummed behind me like everything was normal. The way my coffee was still steaming on the counter, and outside the kitchen window, the October wind was pushing dead leaves against the glass like patient, skeletal fingers. Everything was ordinary. Everything was exactly the kind of quiet Tuesday morning that you don't think twice about. And then I heard my own voice come through that speaker, and the world I thought I lived in quietly folded itself up and put itself away forever. The message said this. Don't open the basement door tonight. I know you heard it. I know you're thinking about going down there right now. Please, please just don't. A pause. Long enough that I thought the message had ended. And then, barely above a whisper, so close to the receiver it sounded like someone whispering directly into my ear. It knows your name. Click. I stood there for what must have been a full minute. Just standing. The coffee steamed. The refrigerator hummed. The leaves kept scratching at the window. And then, slowly, against every instinct screaming at me not to, my eyes traveled across the kitchen to the basement door. It was open. Just an inch. Just a single, dark, impossible inch that I was absolutely certain had not been there when I walked into the kitchen 12 minutes earlier. Cold air was seeping through that gap and pooling around my bare feet. Not the kind of cold that comes from a drafty old house. The kind of cold that makes you feel like something is watching you. The pressurized, electric cold of a held breath. I never leave that door open. I want to be very clear about that. I have a habit, some might call it a compulsion, of checking every door in my house before bed. My therapist at the time called it anxiety-driven ritual behavior. I called it being thorough. Either way, I check every door. Every night. Without exception. And the basement door is always the last one I check, because it's the one I like the least. I don't have a good reason for not liking it. I've lived in that house for 11 years. I bought it at 32, fresh out of a long and exhausting relationship, looking for a project. The basement was unfinished but dry, nothing unusual about it. Concrete floor. Wooden shelving units left by the previous owner. A water heater. A circuit breaker box. A single hanging bulb on a pull string that cast more shadows than light. Perfectly ordinary. There was no reason to dislike that door. And yet, I crossed the kitchen. I put my hand on the basement door handle. I could feel the cold radiating from the crack, washing over my knuckles. I pulled the door shut. The latch clicked into place with a sound that felt, in that silence, enormously final. I exhaled. And then something knocked. 3 knocks. Slow. Deliberate. Patient in a way that was somehow worse than frantic would have been. Not from the bottom of the stairs. Not from the top. From somewhere in the middle. Like whatever was down there had already made it halfway up before I closed the door. I did not move. The knocking stopped. My phone buzzed on the counter. I looked at it from across the room like it was a snake. A voicemail notification. Left at 3:47 a.m. Same time. The exact same timestamp as the first one. My hand was shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone twice before I got it unlocked. I hit play. Pressed it against my ear. Heard 3 seconds of silence, and then my own voice, and this time it sounded different. This time it sounded like someone who had been crying for a long time and had simply run out of tears. You opened it, didn't you? Not a question. We told you not to open it. I ran. I want you to understand that I am not, by nature, a person who runs. I am 6 feet 1 inch tall. I spent 4 years in the military in my early 20s. I've dealt with bar fights, car accidents, a house fire in my late 30s that took everything I owned except what I was wearing. I am not easily frightened, and I am even less easily moved to panic. I ran out of that kitchen barefoot. I ran down the hallway. I ran out the front door without stopping to grab my keys or my coat or my shoes. I ran across the frosted October grass in my socks, across the driveway, across the street, and I didn't stop until I was hammering on my neighbor Carol's front door with both fists. She let me in. She wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and put a cup of tea in my hands, and she called the police without asking me twice. 2 officers came. They searched the house for 45 minutes. They found nothing. No one hiding. No broken windows. No unlocked doors except the front one I'd left wide open behind me. The basement was empty. The water heater ticked. The circuit breaker hummed. The shelving units sat exactly as they always had, holding boxes of things I kept meaning to sort through and never did. No sign of any intruder. No explanation. But on the way out, one of the officers, a quiet, broad-shouldered man named Officer DeLuca who had said very little during the entire search, stopped in the kitchen doorway. He turned around slowly and looked at me with an expression I still haven't been able to fully name. Not fear, exactly. But something adjacent to it. Something that looked like a man recalibrating. "Mr. Harlan," he said. "The basement. When did you last actually go down there?" "I don't know. Weeks, maybe. I've been busy." He nodded once. "There's dust on the floor down there. Pretty thick. I told you, I haven't been using it much." "Right." Another pause. He chose his next words very carefully. "There are footprints in the dust. A lot of them. All different sizes." He cleared his throat. "They've all been walking in circles. Same path, over and over. Looks like it's been going on for a long time." I stared at him. "None of them lead to the stairs," he said. "Whatever made those prints, they weren't walking toward the stairs. They were just circling." He looked at the basement door. "Which means whatever knocked on those stairs tonight wasn't coming up from the basement." The room felt very small. "It was already up here," he said quietly. "With you." They never found an explanation. No charges filed, no suspects identified, no rational account offered for the voicemails or the footprints or the knocking. Officer DeLuca gave me his card before he left and told me to call if anything else happened. The way he said it suggested he didn't entirely expect me to still be living there. He wasn't wrong. I stayed at Carol's for 3 days. On the 4th day I went back, in full daylight, with my brother Marcus, who is large and skeptical and absolutely the right person to have beside you when you're doing something that terrifies you. We went through every room. We went down to the basement together and I stood at the top of the stairs and watched him crouch down and examine the footprints. "Huh," he said, which is about as expressive as Marcus gets. "Huh what?" "They're all different. Look." He pointed. "That one's a child's. That one's from a boot, man's size. That one there, that looks like a woman's heel. Please stop narrating them. And they're all going the same direction. Just round and round." He stood up and dusted off his knee. "Old house like this, all kinds of people been through here. Could be old prints. In a pattern like that?" Marcus didn't answer, which meant he didn't have a good one. I moved out 2 months later. Rented an apartment on the other side of the city and tried, with moderate success, to forget about 41 Creller Road. Then, because I'm apparently the kind of person things like this happen to, I started looking into the history of the house. I don't know what I was expecting. Probably nothing. Probably a quick search that turned up 40 years of boring ownership records and sent me to bed satisfied. Instead I found Eleanor Voss. Eleanor Voss had lived at 41 Creller Road from 1962 until 1989. 27 years. By all available accounts she was a perfectly ordinary woman, a schoolteacher, a widow, a keeper of a very well-reviewed vegetable garden according to a neighborhood newsletter from 1974 that had somehow been digitized and indexed. She had no children of her own. She did, however, take in boarders. Over the course of those 27 years, Eleanor Voss housed no fewer than 14 different people in the upstairs rooms of 41 Creller Road. Of those 14 people, I was able to find records for 11. Of those 11, 6 had died in the house. Not violently. Not suspiciously, at least not in any way that had ever been officially flagged. A heart attack. Pneumonia. One elderly man who simply didn't wake up one morning in the winter of 1981. But 6 out of 11, all in the same house, over 27 years. I told myself that was just the math of an era when people died at home more often. I told myself Eleanor Voss was housing elderly and vulnerable people as an act of community service, which would skew the numbers. I told myself a lot of things. Then I found the letter. It was in the County Historical Archive, part of a collection donated by the family of the woman who had owned the house before Eleanor, a Mrs. Patricia Hemmel. The collection was mostly receipts and correspondence, and the letter was near the bottom of the third box, handwritten on yellowed paper in a cramped, slanted hand. It was addressed to Patricia Hemmel from her sister in Ohio, dated November 1958. The relevant section read: I do not understand why you continue to stay in that place after everything that has happened. You told me yourself that you have not been able to sleep since Harold passed, and that you hear things in the night. You told me about the door. Patty, a door that opens by itself is not a sign, it is a symptom. Get out of that house. Whatever Harold saw in that basement in his last weeks, whatever it was that took the light out of his eyes, you do not need to understand it. You just need to leave. Harold Hemmel had died in the house in October 1957. In the basement. The official cause of death was a cardiac event. He was 53 years old, with no prior history of heart disease. I should have stopped there. Every sensible fiber of my being was telling me to close the archive browser, throw my notes in the recycling, and go live a long and peaceful life far away from 41 Creller Road and everyone who had ever set foot in it. But there's a particular kind of person who, when faced with a door they've been told not to open, cannot help themselves. I used to think that made me brave. I now understand it makes me something else entirely. I hired a researcher. Her name was Diane Marsh. She worked out of a small office near the university, and she specialized in what she called property genealogy. Finding the full human history of a place. Who lived there, who died there, who left in a hurry and never came back. I gave her the address and a 3-week timeline and tried not to think about it. She came back to me in 11 days. She sat across from me in a coffee shop and put a manila folder on the table between us and pressed her palm flat on top of it before she slid it over, like she was making sure it couldn't escape on its own. I want to ask you something before you open that, she said. Okay. What are you hoping to find? I thought about it. An explanation. And if the explanation is worse than not knowing? I opened the folder. The history of 41 Creller Road went back further than I'd found on my own. The land itself had been the site of something before the house was built, a small structure, purpose unknown, that appeared on an 1887 survey map and then vanished from all subsequent records. In the margin of that survey, in faded pencil, someone had written 2 words that Diane had photographed and enlarged: below ground. The house was built in 1921 by a man named August Renner, a German immigrant who had come to the United States in 1919 and purchased the land for an amount that struck Diane as unusually low for the period and location. August Renner lived alone. He had no family that any record could locate. He applied for no building permits for the basement, unusual, Diane noted, even for that era, and yet the basement existed, fully constructed, when the house was sold in 1931 after Renner disappeared. He didn't die. He simply wasn't there one morning. His neighbor reported noticing the lights off for several days. Authorities entered the house and found it in perfect order, dishes washed, bed made, nothing out of place. August Renner's coat and hat were still on the hook by the door. His wallet was on the kitchen table. He was never found. The house sat empty for 4 years before the Hemmel family purchased it in 1935. Patricia Hemmel's husband Harold, who would die in that basement 22 years later. Who, according to his wife's letter to her sister, had seen something in those final weeks that took the light out of his eyes. After Eleanor Voss, the boarding house keeper, the schoolteacher, the woman who housed 14 people and watched 6 of them die, the property passed through 3 more owners in relatively quick succession. A young couple who left after 8 months with no explanation given to their realtor. A single man named Thomas Greaves who lasted 2 years and then transferred to a job overseas, voluntarily taking a significant pay cut to make the move as fast as possible. And then a woman named Sandra Park, who lived there for 6 unremarkable years and sold it, in 2008, to me. I called Sandra Park. It took me 4 attempts across 2 weeks before she answered, and when she did, I could tell from the pause after I said the address that she recognized it immediately. That she had been expecting, on some level, to receive exactly this call. I wondered, she said. I always wondered if someone would call eventually. You never reported anything, I said. No complaints to the realtor, no disclosures. What would I have said? That I heard things. Her voice was steady but careful, the voice of someone who has rehearsed a version of this conversation many times in their head. That the basement door sometimes opened on its own. They would have knocked money off the price and found someone else to buy it. That someone would eventually be calling me too. What did you hear? A long pause. Voices, she said. At night. From the basement. I could never make out words. It sounded like a lot of people talking at once, very quietly, just below the threshold of being understandable. Like a room full of people all murmuring to each other. Another pause. I told myself it was the pipes. Old houses have all kinds of sounds. But you left. I left, she agreed. I asked her the question I'd been building toward the whole conversation. Sandra. Did you ever actually go into the basement? At night, I mean. Did you ever open that door after dark and go down there? The silence this time was so long I thought she'd hung up. Once, she said finally. Just once. In my 2nd year. What did you see? Nothing, she said. That's what I'm telling you. I went down there with a flashlight and there was nothing. Concrete floor. The shelves. The water heater. All of it exactly as it should be. A pause. But the feeling. The feeling of being down there in the dark. Like the room was full of people standing just outside the beam of my flashlight. Like if I moved it even slightly I would see something I would never recover from. Her voice had gone very quiet. I went back upstairs. I never went down again. I sold the house 4 years later. The footprints, I said. The circular ones. The longest pause yet. You saw those too, she said. Not a question. The police saw them. The night I left. I saw them in my 1st month, Sandra said. I assumed they were mine. That I'd been sleepwalking. I started locking my bedroom door at night. A breath. I want to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me because I've been carrying this for 15 years. Okay. Did you ever feel, in that house, like you were being observed? Not watched, that implies something benign. Observed. Like something was collecting data on you. I thought about the 11 years I'd lived there. About the low-level, never quite defined discomfort that I'd always attributed to the house being old, or to living alone, or to my anxiety. About the way I'd always felt, particularly in the kitchen and particularly near that basement door, like I was performing for an invisible audience. Yes, I said. Then you already know everything you need to know, Sandra Park said. Stop researching. Stop looking. Whatever is in that house has been there a very long time and it does not become more understandable the longer you look at it. A pause. Take care of yourself. She hung up. I listened to Sandra Park. For about 8 months. Then I got the second voicemail. October 14th. The 1-year anniversary of the night I ran out of the house. I was in my apartment, in bed, when my phone buzzed on the nightstand. I looked at the notification even though I knew I shouldn't. 3:47 a.m. My own number in the caller ID. My own voice in the message. You're still looking, aren't you? I can tell from here. You need to stop. You need to stop because the more attention you pay to it, the more attention it pays to you. That's how it works. That's always been how it works. A pause. I don't have much time. I'm going to try to explain what it is, but I need you to listen very carefully. It is not a ghost. It is not a demon. It is not anything that has a name in any language you've ever encountered. It is old. Older than the house, older than the land, older than the concept of the land. It lives in the space below the lowest point of any structure built above it, and it feeds on static. Long, horrible static. And then my voice again, further away now, like I was being pulled back from the phone. Don't go back to the house. Whatever you do, whatever reason you think you have, do not. The message ended. I sat in my dark apartment with my phone in my hand and my heart going at approximately twice its normal rate, and I thought about what the voice, my voice, had been trying to say. It lives in the space below the lowest point of any structure. Every structure. Not just 41 Creller Road. I looked at the floor of my apartment. My apartment building had a basement. I didn't sleep that night. I spent it sitting in the exact center of my bed with all the lights on, doing something I'm not proud of. I was calculating. Going back through 11 years of life at 41 Creller Road and trying to identify every moment that might, in retrospect, have been something more than coincidence. There were more than I expected. The year I had inexplicable insomnia for 4 straight months. The period in 2013 when I kept losing time, not dramatically, not in any way that had alarmed my doctor at the time, but small gaps. Arriving somewhere without a clear memory of the drive. Waking up in the kitchen with no recollection of getting out of bed. I'd attributed it all to stress, to overwork, to the aftermath of my mother's death that year. The dreams. I hadn't thought about the dreams in years, had buried them so thoroughly that it took the full sleepless length of that night to excavate them. But they came back to me now with the horrible clarity of something that had never actually gone away, just been pushed below the surface. In the dreams, I was always in the basement. Always in the dark. And there were always people there with me, shapes of people, the suggestion of people, standing in a wide circle. Not moving. Not speaking. Just present. Just accumulating, like they'd been there long before I arrived and fully expected to be there long after I left. And at the center of the circle, where the darkness was thickest, something that was not a person and not a thing and not anything my dreaming mind could successfully render was simply, quietly, watching. I'd woken from those dreams feeling not frightened but oddly calm. The calm of someone who has been assessed and filed away. The calm that Sandra Park had described as being observed. By morning I had talked myself into something I cannot fully explain or defend. I had decided that the only way to understand what I was dealing with, and, more importantly, to understand what the voice in those messages was trying to warn me about, was to go back to the house. I want to be absolutely clear, I knew this was a terrible idea. I knew it the same way you know that a stove burner is hot before you touch it. The knowledge was complete and unambiguous. I went back anyway. The house had new owners. A family. I'd driven past once in the spring and seen a bicycle in the driveway and a child's drawing taped to the inside of the front window. I'd kept driving and tried not to think about it. I didn't knock on the front door. I'm not proud of this either, but I parked 2 streets over and came around to the back of the property through a neighbor's unfenced yard at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night in October. The house was dark. No cars in the driveway. Away for the week, I hoped, or just asleep. The back door, which I'd used as my main entrance for most of my 11 years there, was locked. This was not a problem, because I had, in a moment of either tremendous foresight or tremendous foolishness, never returned my spare key when I sold the property. I had simply forgotten about it, or told myself I had forgotten about it, and found it a year later in the bottom of a box of kitchen things. I let myself in. The house smelled different. Cooking smells, a child's particular smell, the presence of a family who filled the space with ordinary living. I stood in the dark kitchen and felt, for just a moment, the desperate hope that this had done it. That human warmth and daily noise and the accumulated clutter of a busy family had simply crowded whatever it was out of existence. Then I saw that the basement door was open. Just an inch. Just a single, dark, impossible inch. I stood there for a long time. Longer than I should have. Long enough for the cold to reach me. Then I did the thing I had been working towards since the night I ran out of this house a year ago. I pulled the door open. I found the pull string for the light. I went down the stairs. The basement looked exactly as I remembered it, which is to say it looked exactly as every owner had described it, which is to say it looked perfectly ordinary. Concrete floor. Wooden shelving. Water heater. The single bulb throwing its insufficient light. The footprints were there. The circular ones. Pressed deeply into the dust, far too many for any single individual, going around and around a wide circle in the center of the floor. And at the center of the circle, the dust was completely undisturbed. I walked to the edge of the circle and crouched down. Looked at the pristine, unmarked center. And understood, with a clarity that was almost peaceful, that the circle wasn't a path of something walking around a point. It was a boundary. Whatever was at the center of it didn't walk. Whatever was at the center had simply always been there, sitting in its space below the lowest point of the structure, accumulating observation after observation, generation after generation of tenants and owners and boarders walking above it, dreaming near it, slowly and quietly being studied by something so patient it had ceased to experience time the way we do. The footprints were not a sign of danger. They were receipts. All those people, going down into this basement, circling this point at the center, and then going back upstairs. Not because something had dragged them down. Because something had called them. Gently, persistently, in the frequency of half-heard sounds and vivid dreams and the feeling of being watched, until one day they found themselves at the top of the stairs with a flashlight in their hand and no clear memory of having decided to come down. I stood up. I took one step back. And I heard, for the first time, not a knock or a creak or a thump but an actual sound from the center of that circle. A voice. My voice. Coming from the undisturbed dust at the center, thin and distant and completely calm. Now you understand. I went back up the stairs. I pulled the basement door shut behind me. I went out the back door, across the yard, down 2 streets to my car, and I drove away. I have not been back. That was 3 years ago. Every October 14th I get a voicemail at 3:47 in the morning. My own voice, my own number. I save them and I do not listen to them. I have a folder on my phone labeled with a date, and every year it gets 1 entry heavier, and I do not open it. I've moved twice since the apartment. I chose both new places carefully, upper floors only. No basement access from my unit. Buildings where the lowest point is as far below me as possible. It helps. Not completely, but enough. What I know, and I'm sharing this because I believe you have a right to understand the world you live in, is this: there are places where something very old has settled. It doesn't want anything from you that you would recognize as wanting. It doesn't want to hurt you. It doesn't want your soul in any theological sense. It wants to know you. To add you to its long, long catalog of the people who have moved above it, going about their small human lives, dreaming their small human dreams. It collects experience the way some people collect photographs, and it is very, very patient, and it has been doing this since long before any house stood above it, since long before the concept of a house existed. And the thing is, the part that keeps me awake on October nights, is that I don't know how many places like 41 Creller Road there are. I don't know if the building you're in right now is one of them. I don't know what's below the lowest point of whatever structure you're sitting in at this exact moment. But I want you to think about the dreams you've had lately. The ones that felt less like imagination and more like memory. The ones set in a dark room, with shapes at the edges, and the sense of something at the center that is simply, quietly, collecting you. If those dreams are familiar, I'm sorry. It already knows your name. And somewhere below you, right now, in the dark, it is remarkably, terribly patient. Sleep well.